Hello everybody and welcome to the channel. It's Paulie Esther here. This is going to be part 2 of the Newsweek articles featuring Dead by Daylight. Part 2 talks about how they obtain licenses, the licenses that got away, and the licenses they'd like to get in the future. Thought this was pretty interesting. So part 1 was about Ringu, and this is going to be about everything else, I guess. So let's get started here. This appeared in the News Geek section of Newsweek magazine online here. And it talks, continues the interview with Dave Richard, and it says, Dead by Daylight creative director on his dream Stephen King collaboration. Now, I saw a lot of people who were talking about Yoichi being in that yellow raincoat and saying, oh my gosh, this is a tease that to Georgie from It, and it means we're going to get It in the future. I don't know about that. It would be very, very strange to see one license tease another license. Not impossible, I guess. I think it's just a coincidence for that typical color rain slicker you see people wear outdoors. Anyway, so it starts with this trailer that we've seen already, and it goes on to begin with Dead by Daylight has evolved dramatically since its release in 2016, and what was once a playful tribute to the slasher genre has now become a deeply interconnected universe where various horror icons coexist and interact with each other. For instance, you can have Freddy Krueger hunting down Nancy from Stranger Things, Laurie Strode disarming the Jigsaw Killer's intricate traps, or Resident Evil's Leon using his police training to evade the lacerating chains of Pinhead. So cool. Next up, Sadako from the Ringu franchise will be making her Dead by Daylight debut with all her psychic powers and ghostly abilities being carefully translated into the game's mechanics. In the words of Dave Richard, Dead by Daylight's creative director, the multiplayer title has basically transformed into a horror hall of fame at this point. Reflecting on that journey, the speed bumps encountered along the way, and what he'd like to do next, the development lead spoke to Newsweek in an exclusive interview. Dead by Daylight creative director on his dream collaboration. Before we go any further, it's worth establishing precisely what Richard does over at Behavior Interactive. As a creative director for the studio, he coordinates a legion of artists, programmers, sound designers, quality assurance testers, and story writers while they build new content for Dead by Daylight. This means that he oversees the development for each of the game's chapters, which are essentially seasons if you prefer the Fortnite or Call of Duty Warzone terminology. In other words, whenever a new killer, survivor, or map is added to Dead by Daylight, Richard is there behind the scenes making sure that everything goes smoothly. Suffice it to say, he is a key figure at Behavior Interactive and has a lot of influence on future projects. It is therefore interesting to know what he'd personally like to see happen next after the upcoming Ringu collaboration has launched. When asked about this, Richard did tease one crossover that he would really like to see happen. In the past, we have mentioned some franchises that we want to work on. Of course, we're a big team and we share a love for horror video games, movies, and even novels. We all have dream collaborations and iconic moments that we'd like to replicate in Dead by Daylight. Candyman? Okay. Personally, I am a giant fan of Stephen King's universe and the villains from his books. I would love to be able to do one of his monsters at some point. I think that would be amazing. It's such a great universe and there are so many different possibilities we could explore. Christine? If you make Christine work in Dead by Daylight, hats off to you, sir. Alright. This is certainly a tantalizing prospect for fans, as it's easy to get excited about the idea of controlling Pennywise the dancing clown, sneaking around the dilapidated corridors of the Overlook Hotel, or unleashing your psychic rage as Carrie White. By the way, I saw this article that talked about like 10 different Stephen King properties that are getting a reboot. Like Stephen King stuff's going to be hotter than ever. Salem's Lot, a number of things that are getting redone. So Stephen King is going to be just as relevant as he always has been. All right, here we go. Love to get one of those licenses in too. Unfortunately, just because Richard wants to bring Stephen King into the Dead by Daylight universe doesn't mean that it's guaranteed to happen. While he does get a lot of say in what happens with the game, he cannot unilaterally commission an It or The Shining chapter without jumping through a few legal hoops. Dead by Daylight's creative director on the licenses that got away. Indeed, licensing negotiations are an integral part of these video game collaborations, and they don't always pan out as intended. Speaking about this, Richard admits that there have been a few hiccups along the way. He said, "When you work on a licensing deal, there are so many people involved in getting it off the ground. There's the business aspect, the creative aspect, and then we also have to think about if it's really a good fit for Dead by Daylight in the first place. Sometimes, even if both parties really want to work together, it can't happen for legal reasons or just because the timing isn't right. It's sad, but it's the reality of the situation, and that's why we are careful about publicly sharing our wish list. Because people might get excited about something we mention, and then the deal could fall through, or it never happens." While that can obviously be disappointing, Richard does point out that collabs aren't the lifeblood of Dead by Daylight anyway. In fact, he actually prefers working on wholly original creations. Elaborating upon this, he said, "I'm someone who enjoys creating characters and creating worlds, so starting from a blank slate is more rewarding to me. I just love making new stuff." How the Dead by Daylight crossovers come about. Speaking of which, when Dead by Daylight first launched, Behavior Interactive didn't have the necessary clout to secure major licenses like they do now, and as such, all of its content was original, if a little derivative. To begin with, the only killers that were available to play as were pastiches of ones that you would recognize from Hollywood movies. For instance, the Trapper loosely resembles Jason Voorhees, and the Hillbilly is a clear stand-in for Leatherface. Over time, the game became increasingly popular, and eventually, the team were able to convince film studios and other game developers to lend them intellectual property. The first stab, I see what you did there, at one of these crossovers was with the Halloween series when the legendary Michael Myers joined the Dead by Daylight killer roster. Describing on how this originated, Richard said, "That's one I'm incredibly proud of. I was a game designer back then, and it was such a weird pitch from me. When I came up with the idea, I said that he was just going to stalk people. If you play as Michael Myers in our game, then you're going to spend most of your time hiding behind a bush, waiting for the ideal moment to strike." The rest of the team were like, "Meh," but then we prototyped it, and it worked really well because it was super scary, and it gave you a new type of emotional experience. This wasn't just somebody running after you, it was a creepier take. I think Myers works so well, and yeah, the team should be proud that they got that license. It's really impressive looking back that was a big one and a good one to get, and arguably it started the whole ball rolling for everything that came after it. So I'm really proud of that one because of how it turned out and because of how it legitimized our game. There was suddenly a recognizable movie slasher in Dead by Daylight for you to play as. No argument there. I remember when I first got started in Dead by Daylight and my friend showed me they're going to get Myers, I was like, wow, the legitimacy factor just went through the roof for that. Indeed, that unassuming Halloween chapter fundamentally changed the entire trajectory of the game by opening doors for other collaborations in the future. Since 2017, there have been Evil Dead, Scream, Silent Hill, Nightmare on Elm Street, and Texas Chainsaw Massacre themed crossovers in Dead by Daylight, to name but a few. Explaining on how the team pick and choose their licenses, Richard said, "We try to chase IPs that we love and have affection for, because we want to be able to convince the license holders that we're true fans and that we understand their franchises and that we can be trusted to handle them properly. Of course, we have to think about which characters will serve the Dead by Daylight universe, which monsters and psychos have our fans always wanted to control, and how can they be incorporated into our online matches, and what emotions will they bring out. Those are the most important considerations for us." All right, that's the end of this article, I think, because they have the correction there about the spelling of Behavior Interactive. Yeah, I guess that's it. So they say they don't want to publicly share the wish list because it might disappoint people if it falls through. But also, the wish list is Stephen King's universe. So what does that mean? Does that mean that one's done? I don't know. I honestly feel like the 6th anniversary has to be some kind of a big license, because they always have done, like the last, 3 years running at least, they've done a big licensed IP for the anniversary. And I just feel like if you don't have a licensed IP coming as your next bullet in your gun to shoot it to the fans in the anniversary in May, June, you would have held this, and the Ringu chapter would have been your big bullet to display, wouldn't it? Ringu's pretty big. So do they have something even bigger? And if so, what would it be? I would say, yeah, some Stephen King stuff probably qualifies for that. Also Jason, also Five Nights at Freddy's. Those would be things that would be on par to allow you to put Xidax out in March and then come up with something just as equally big in May/June. I can't wait to see what it is. Anyway, that's the end of that article. Thank you very much for watching this video. I always appreciate your time spent here with me. So I thank you for that. Don't forget to take care of each other in and out of the fog, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
It's a Gen Rush life for us. It's a Gen Rush life for us. Set a hiding, we do gens. Set a randoms, we got friends. It's a Gen Rush life.